Now being joined by Meera Shankar, the former Indian ambassador to the United States. Madam Ambassador, it's a pleasure talking to you, and I'm sure it must be heartening for you to see the depth of engagement and relationships that now seem to be rolling out between India and the United States, and presumably something that is going to see a massive acceleration next week as well. How do you see this visit of Prime Minister Modi and all the atmospherics that we're hearing about around this particular visit?
Well, I think it's an important visit because there have been some differences over Ukraine and therefore, some doubts in certain quarters about the relationship. But the relationship is very solid because there is an increasing convergence of strategic interests and also economic interests in the Asia-Pacific region in particular. I think the relationship has managed to weather the turbulence caused by the differences over Ukraine, and that's a good thing. And it's an occasion to really solidify the relationship in substantive terms. We have been talking about cooperation in the field of defense through the Defense Technology and Trade Initiative, not just for purchasing weapons, but also for joint research, joint development, joint production. But it really didn't take off. It was confined to some pilot projects. Now you have two different things which have happened. One is that the Quad has become a much closer knit grouping, which has been meeting at the highest level, at the summit level. And it has, while it's not strictly a military grouping, it actually has identified several strategic sectors for cooperation, including critical and emerging technologies, resilient supply chains.
So, we've just been looking at what are some of the specific deals that could be signed, as that Micron deal, of course, the jet engine deal, which could be the big one, the question of drones, quantum computing. This could be some of the actual deliverables, if you like, from the trip. But on the symbolism part, it seems to be quite a warm embrace. The United States extending a state visit of this time. I think the Prime Minister is only going to become one of the third or a very small number of world leaders to actually address a joint session of the U.S. Congress twice. So there is a lot of symbolism. Is this unusual from the American side, this sort of a warm embrace?
Yes, I think that this kind of symbolism was also extended to Manmohan Singh after the Indo-US nuclear deal, which was seen as a path-breaking initiative, which enabled the two countries to overcome their differences on an issue which had clouded the relationship and prevented it from reaching its full potential. Of course, it also opened up the possibility for India to import natural uranium fuel for its civil nuclear power plants, and in a sense integrated India into the international system, perhaps not as far as we would have liked, because we would have liked to be treated on par with the 5 nuclear weapon states. But somewhere in between, we were integrated into the international system. So I think that was a special gesture. And this now is certainly a special gesture, particularly given the fact that in the recent past, there have been different points of view on Ukraine flowing from our own strategic imperatives and perspectives.
Well, Ambassador Shankar, we've been listening to a lot of the positives, of course, and talking about the positives, but there are also irritants and the downside. One, obviously, the Americans would have wanted to see a lot more from India on the question of Russia and Ukraine, although they seem to have agreed to disagree on those questions. And then there's also the possibility that those issues will come up, which India obviously hates, countries talking to it about things like human rights or democracy or its democracy under threat under India. What did Jack Dorsey just say? So, bad timing just ahead of a trip like this. So, do you think some of those irritants will come up in this visit, or are they going to be papered over and pushed under the carpet and buried right now in light of all the major positive activity that will be taking place?
Well, let me say that I think the Biden administration has tiptoed around these issues in a sense, because their assessment has been that Prime Minister Modi is a strong leader, and that the converging strategic imperatives override some of these other concerns. But they do raise these issues in private conversations. So it's one of those issues, strengthening the relationship with India, on which there is a bipartisan consensus. When this whole issue of Ukraine was being debated in the US Congress, and India's, why is India not with us on this and so on, and concern was expressed over it, then I think many members also made the point that the US should do more to provide India the equipment and technology it needs for its defense, to wean it away from Russia, or to reduce its dependence on Russia. And I think that there has been an acceptance, grudging or otherwise, of the fact that India has very solid reasons for, wanting to keep Russia on board.
All right, Ambassador Meera Shankar, thank you so much for joining us. Rather clear exposition of what we should expect next week. Now, you're going to hear a lot of talk, of course, about the atmospherics of Prime Minister Modi's visit and also those defense and other deals. But there's something else that could be happening next week that we would like to draw your attention to and keep an eye on it. And that is possible movement forward in the areas of high technology, discussions around it, perhaps even some signing of deals around it. That is something else that you should not lose sight of in all the excitement over defense deals. Joining me now to discuss that in more detail, Trisha Ray, Deputy Director, Center for Security, Strategy and Technology at the Observer Research Foundation. Trisha, thank you so much for joining us. Look, there's going to be a lot of talk about defense and other things when Prime Minister Modi is in the United States. But technology, digital technology, emerging technology, quantum computing, for example, are those some of the areas where you also think there's going to be a lot of forward movement?
Yes, certainly. So digital and emerging technologies are somewhat of a sunrise area in the US-India partnership. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One is that right now, India is one of the few emerging economies that still has a very positive growth outlook. So India is a promising market for a lot of, say, US companies, as well as global tech companies who want to continue growing. The other is that India has a burgeoning Digital India initiative, including things like digital public infrastructure, that the rest of the world is also looking to emulate now. So not just in terms of markets, but in terms of India's own tech exports, there's a lot of promise for cooperation between US and India.
Of course, the big question on advanced technology is that the United States has been very reluctant to share it with India. Now, after the civil nuclear deal, it has started to change. Is it changing more? Are the Americans willing to share the most advanced technologies that they have with India now?
Yes, I mean that there is certainly some baggage dating back to the Cold War when it comes to US-India relations, and India has been subject to export controls in the past, and some of that can still weigh heavily on Indian policymaker thinking. But I was in DC recently and have spoken with US Commerce Department and State Department officials, and that's certainly no longer the thinking on the US side. So they are looking to India as a promising partner in some of their friend-shoring initiatives. So reshoring their own supply chains to partners that they trust, and India is cited as a trusted partner. So semiconductors, in which US and India recently signed an MOU, is one such area. This is a sensitive technology that they've already linked to national security interests. and they want to partner with India on this.
Are there any other areas where you think there could be some sort of a breakthrough in the near future? Now, we hear so much spoken about AI, of course, but there are other potential areas where the Chinese have a very clear edge over both the United States and India, and therefore some sort of collaboration and cooperation would make sense. Rare earth, of course, comes to mind. Batteries, electric vehicles, and battery technology. China, for example, has, I think, a share more than the rest of the world put together. So are those the sort of areas where you think, and perhaps any other area that catches your attention, where the Indians and the Americans can work together to counter the Chinese?
No, rare earths is certainly an interesting one. The challenge, of course, is that in India, this is entirely public sector controlled, and Indian production of rare earths is really way below the threshold that we can be producing at. It could be an area of cooperation if the US chooses to invest in some of this. But yes, green tech is definitely something that could become an area of cooperation. So currently, China is the largest exporter of lithium-ion batteries. And India is one of the largest importers in the world of such batteries. And last year, the government made a really big push for electric vehicle adoption in the country. Where will these batteries come from? That's certainly a question that the US and India could think together upon. But the first step really required on the US-India side is a shared understanding of what the risks really are on relying on just China for these batteries, because China hasn't weaponized these supply chains yet as it has in other areas.
Yes, of course, China could weaponize it. China probably will weaponize it. And talking about weaponizing, last question to you. On this entire question of defense and the sharing of sensitive and critical defense technology, because I think the US seems to have finally woken up to a very important fact that if we can empower a range of partners in the Indo-Pacific, then we don't have to take the entire burden on ourselves. Now, that seems to be the thinking in the United States. So do you feel the US is now prepared to share just about any advanced technologies with countries like India, or are we not yet at that stage? Because somebody will say India is not a formal ally, it's not a treaty partner, so there are certain things that we should not yet share with India.
Well, yes, that's a tricky question. I mean, India, yes, it's a rising trusted partner, but we're not, for example, the Five Eyes. We're not at that level of trust that is also backed by institutional arrangements that bring the two countries closer together. Again, I believe that the US does see India as a critical part of this security architecture that it is building in the Indo-Pacific. But defense cooperation, aside from, say, some of these production deals that are being signed between the two countries, still has a ways to go. But as I said, aside from China, India is the largest power in the Indo-Pacific. So this is a natural closeness that is bound to come in the coming years.
Trisha Ray from the Europe, thank you so much for joining us with that important perspective.